It's a Mailbag Friday on today's episode of Locked On Pirates. And the biggest question submitted, rightfully so, who is the next Pittsburgh Pirates player to get an extension?
You are Locked On Pirates, your daily Pittsburgh Pirates podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And folks, welcome back to the Locked On Pirates podcast here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team, your Pittsburgh Pirates every day. My name is, of course, Ethan Smith, your host of this wonderful show here on the Locked On Podcast Network. You can follow me on Twitter right there at MVP_Ethan or at Locked On Pirates for all of your news, analysis, opinions, and reactions to everything going on in the world of the Pittsburgh Pirates. Of course, in the world of the Pittsburgh Pirates yesterday, the Pittsburgh Pirates extended Mitch Keller to a 5-year, $77 million extension. You'll see the card right up here if you want to go rewatch the live stream. It's also live on all of your audio platforms as well. So thank you guys for that. I know we've kind of had to push back the player review preview series a little bit. Jack Sawinski, the right fielders, and the prospects are the 3 episodes left that round that out. We'll be covering those next week. We also have actual baseball to talk about this weekend with the Pittsburgh Pirates playing tomorrow, although it won't be televised. And, of course, on Sunday against the Baltimore Orioles, which should be televised as well. And it's just nice to have baseball back. It was very nice to see the Dodgers and the Padres play yesterday, although it wasn't the greatest game in the world. But baseball's back, folks, and that means Locked On Pirates is back in full swing as well, coming your way Monday through Friday. Sometimes on Saturdays, we'll see what happens, but you're getting 5 days a week no matter what. I just needed Tuesday off this week. That's the only thing I needed, and then we're good. I wanted to do a mailbag this week, though, because there was a lot on Twitter, a lot on social media that was going on until this Mitch Keller thing where I was like, I just want to talk actual baseball. I don't want to talk about the semantics of all of the financials that go on in baseball and all these other things that were kind of clouding everybody throughout the week on social media. So I went out of my way and said, let's have a mailbag show. And I got some very good questions from all of you, as I always do for these shows. You guys seem to love these shows too. So I think this is going to become a normal Friday thing moving forward, is having these mailbag shows. As long as you guys keep asking questions, I will answer them. That is basically my rule that I have when it comes to these shows. If you guys keep asking the questions, I will answer them. And from Leroy Jenkins 7 on Twitter, and I knew I was going to get this question after I reposted that we were having a mailbag show yesterday. He asked, who will be the next Pittsburgh Pirates player to get an extension? And I knew that I was going to get this question. It's a question that a lot of people have already begun to ask themselves, with the Pittsburgh Pirates, of course, extending 3 different players in the past 3 years now, in Ke'Bryan Hayes, Brian Reynolds, and Mitch Keller. So there seems to be a little bit of a willingness for the Pittsburgh Pirates now, even up to ownership. And I won't say his name, and I'm not going to go on a long tangent about it, but even up to ownership, it seems that it's becoming more of a trend now to see that these guys need to check certain boxes, but once those boxes are checked, they want to extend these guys. They want to keep them in Pittsburgh. They don't want to see the Joe Musgroves and the Jamison Tyones and the Garrett Coles and the Josh Bells of the world all go somewhere else and perform well. They want to see them perform well here. And when you're looking at the candidates for who would be available for an extension next, I mean, there's a lot of guys, I think, that you could look at and say they could get in an extension. I don't think it would be anything that you're looking at, unless you're talking about 2 guys who are in the thumbnail. There are a bunch of guys that could get extensions that aren't necessarily going to be of the same gravity that we got from Hayes, Reynolds, and Keller. Some of those guys could include Jack Sawinski. Jack Sawinski could have a real breakout year this year if he finds a way to limit the strikeouts just a little bit and also put the ball over the fence more. Both things he's very capable of doing. If he can also walk a ton and keep that on base percentage high, folks, Jack Sawinski could have a big year. He's a guy that could get an extension. I would say more in the realm of like a Gregory Polanco extension. Stuff like that, I think, is something that you could really see. maybe 5 years, 55 million or something like that. I could see that kind of deal for a Jack Sawinski if he has a breakout year. You also look at guys like Termar Johnson. We've seen even in division that the Milwaukee Brewers went out of their way to go ahead and extend Jackson Chourio because they know the kid is going to be good. If Termar Johnson has a very good 2024 season and goes into 2025 with the expectation that he's going to be here in 2025, then yeah, go ahead and lock him up if you can. And I think that that would be good practice as well, even though we wouldn't have seen him yet. But the Brewers also said, hey, we think Jackson Chourio is good enough to go ahead and get an extension before we even see him at the at the MLB level, excuse me. And that's something I wouldn't mind the Pirates doing with a guy like Termar Johnson. You even have Henry Davis. If he has a very good season this year, maybe you want to get him locked up long term. There's a lot of different guys that you can look at. But I think the clear-cut two candidates that you would be looking at as far as an extension goes as who would be next, which would probably be next offseason, are O'Neal Cruz and Paul Skeens. And when I start with O'Neal Cruz, folks, we know that this kid is going to be a good baseball player. You heard me speak about it last Friday about O'Neal Cruz. And a lot of the question marks that are going to surround him again are going to be his defense at shortstop and how he comes back from that injury that he sustained last year. And when you're breaking that down, those aren't exactly the worst things to really worry about. You would like to see him also improve in a lot of different areas hitting wise, but he's going to hit the ball hard. He's going to hit the ball far, and he's going to hit a lot of home runs. He's going to steal a lot of bases. That's just what O'Neal Cruz is going to do. And if he has even a normal, healthy campaign where he puts the ball over the fence 20 times, which I think he could do in his sleep if he's healthy for the entire season, and he proves to the team that he can at least play shortstop at least a just below average level, then I think he's an extension candidate for sure. And he's another guy that you would love to have locked up. And personally, for me, I would love to have him locked up too, because you're looking at a guy in O'Neal Cruz that if you lock him up long-term, you're looking at the left side of your infield, really the left side of your diamond, because you have Brian Reynolds, all guys that would just be there for a very, very good amount of time. And that's really nice to see, and something that I think the Pirates should strongly consider. Now, obviously, I think we still need to see a lot more from O'Neal Cruz. One, a full healthy season, and two, some of the improvements that I outlined in that show on Friday. I want to see him limit the strikeouts and the whiff rate a little bit more. I want to see him get on base a little bit more via the free pass. That's really the things that I want to see. And I think those are things that you can see from O'Neal Cruz, and I think he's a pretty clear extension candidate if he does figure those things out. Then you have Paul Skeens, who, yeah, I've spoken about Jared Jones a lot as Jared Jones being the guy that's going to be here first. Paul Skeens does have the opportunity to be a strong player on this team this year if he really does figure it out quickly at the MLB level. But again, I wouldn't be shocked if he was here in 2024. I wouldn't be shocked if he wasn't. That's just where I stand on all of that. And when you're looking at a guy like Skeens and extending a guy like Skeens, again, I think it's a lot like the Jackson Chourio situation. You want to see what he can do if you truly believe that he's as good as he is, which I do, but the team has to believe that, and I do think they do. But when you look at a guy like Paul Skeens, let's say he has a strong 2024, you go into the 2024-2025 offseason and you say, hey, Paul, we want to go ahead and pay you now. We want to go ahead and give you a Mitch Keller-esque contract where you're getting $15 million a year. Now, is this something the Pirates do? That is a big question. We've seen them go ahead and throw some money at guys like Keller, Reynolds, and Hayes. Do they keep doing it? I think that's the biggest question that you see. But as far as it goes as who would be next in line, I think Cruz is definitely the guy that you think of first, just based off of what he does this year. Then you move on to Paul Skeens. You could even throw Jared Jones in the mix if you want to, if he performs well. And then you have the Jack Sawinskis of the world, the Henry Davises of the world. Even if Liover Peguero plays really well, I think you could throw him in that conversation. Even Termar Johnson can be thrown in that conversation. There are a lot of young players that if they go into this and perform very, very well this year, yeah, why not? Why not extend them for half a decade like we've already seen them do for the past couple seasons? And it's something that is very refreshing to see as a Pirates fan, and I hope continues. We're going to keep answering your questions here on the Locked On Pirates podcast on Friday, February 23rd. But before we do that, folks, we're going to talk about Backblaze. Start backing up today because you can get a no-risk free trial at backblaze.com/lockedonmlb because Backblaze is here for you to protect all of your files. It's what it's there for because it has unlimited cloud backup for Macs, PCs, and businesses for just $99 a year. You can easily protect business data through a centrally managed admin and protect all the data on your machines automatically. You can also access your backed up data from anywhere in the world using their web app or iOS and Android apps. You can restore by mail, hard drive with all your data shipped to your door, and you can buy a hard drive restore, send the hard drive back within 30 days, and get a full refund. You also get 1 year file retention and version history, and over 55 billion files have been restored for customers. So visit backblaze.com/lockedonmlb so they know where you came from and to continue to support the show. Recommend, by the way, Backblaze has been recommended by the New York Times, Incorporated Magazine, Macworld, PC World, LifeWire, Tom's Guide, 9 to 5 Mac, and more. So again, receive a fully featured no-risk free trial at backblaze.com/lockedonmlb. Go there, play with it, start protecting yourself from potential bad times. Start today with Backblaze, again at backblaze.com/lockedonmlb. And folks, also don't forget that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And now it is also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. So find Locked On Sports Today now, available on the free Fire TV channels app. And folks, welcome back to the Locked On Pirates podcast here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team, your Pittsburgh Pirates every day. Again, my name is Ethan Smith. Follow me right there. It's on my lower third. It's on your screens on YouTube all the time. Just hit the follow button. I love you guys. Hit me up on all the social media. That's what I want to see. That's what I want to do. We're going to keep answering your questions. And the next one that I want to get into, there was actually 3 or 4 different people that asked about this, which I found very interesting. Leroy Jenkins said, and another mailbag question he has, people are sleeping on Olivares. The dude has power. He was a bright spot on a bad Royals team last year. Will he be the starting right fielder, or is he more of a 4th or 5th outfielder? You also look at Pitt Panther, a guy who answers a lot of questions. How do you see right field playing out? Palacios, Olivares, platoon, Davis in the mix at all? Uncle June, Edward Olivares can be a contributor. There's a lot of Edward Olivares being asked about here, and I was very surprised to see that. And Edward Olivares, again, folks, he's the type of player that you look at that, yeah, he was a bright spot on a Orioles team last year that just was not all that good. An Orioles team now that has really, really done some good things this offseason. But you look at Olivares in a vacuum, he's not a good defensive player. I've already spoken about that whenever they did select him, but you're looking at a guy that hit 263 with a 769 OPS last year, 12 home runs, 11 stolen bases. All of his expected XWOBA, XBA, and X slugging were all higher than they were supposed to be. His expected batting average last year was 270. His expected slugging was 456. So if those are numbers that he can come into next year with and really impress in spring, which I think is going to be what he's going to have to do with Palacios still there, then yeah, I think Olivares has the potential to have a breakout campaign. You're also looking at a guy that he doesn't walk all that much, but he also doesn't strike out all that much either. He was an 83rd percentile player last year with a 16.6 strikeout rate, 15th percentile walk rate with 5.7, doesn't whiff all that much at 22.9, does tend to chase a little bit, has a 31% chase rate. But other than that, I mean, 47% or 34.2% sweet spot percentage, 7.9% barrel rate. You would like to see the velocity come up a little bit more on his average exit velocity. It was in the 15th percentile last year at 87.3. So when you're talking about him being a guy that has a lot of power, yeah, he has a lot of power, but he also needs to tap into it with the average exit velocity a little bit more, which would then in turn just turn him into a phenomenal hitter. But again, has the arm strength to play the outfield, 90th percentile, just not a very good defender at all. I mean, -7 range. out there last year. That's above average. Very fast on the base pass. I mean, this is a guy that if he hits his full potential, folks, he could be a 2020 player. That is not a joke with Edward Olivares. And last year, even, I mean, he had 12 home runs and 11 RBIs in that season. He had 4 home runs and 2 stolen bases the year prior, 5 home runs, 2 stolen bases the year before that. But he's never hit lower than 238 in his career. Talk about a guy who's a 261 career hitter. It's very good. And I think for you guys even asking about him, a lot of people I also do think forget that Edward Olivares is already 27 years of age, which I even when they picked him up thought he was like 25, but that's still the prime time of his career. He still has time to grow into himself. And that right field platoon is an idea. I mean, Olivares is a righty, Palacios is a lefty. I wouldn't mind it at all. Again, the defense is kind of my biggest worry there, but we're going to talk about this more when we're talking about right field next week. But yeah, Olivares is definitely one of those guys that I think could have a potential breakout this year just because he does have the tools to do it. He is that kind of player. He just has to improve the average exit velocity. He has to get the bat off the ball faster. He does that, folks. He'll be fine. Drew Cagle says, which role player from the 2013 team would fit best with this team? Do you think it's possible Shelton uses a 6-man rotation to prevent injury to Keller? I'm going to start with the second question. I've kind of dabbled in the idea that the Pirates could go with a 6-man rotation, even if it means a bullpen game here and there. At the beginning of the year, I don't think they'll do it. I don't think that they have the horses right now to really do it. But when you get JT Brubaker back and Mike Burrows back closer to midseason, and then you have Jared Jones come up and the potential of Paul Skeens, then I don't think I would mind it as much because there is a world where you could have a 6-man rotation of Mitch Keller, Marti Perez, Marco Gonzalez, Paul Skeens or Jared Jones, or both, and then one of Rowe, Quinn Priester, or Ortiz. That's a real thing that you can do. And yeah, obviously that would supplement Keller and his injury concern that a lot of people may have. But I don't really think that they would start the season with a 6-man rotation. I just don't think they have the people to do it. I mean, they have the quantity to do it. I don't think they have the quality to do it. But now midseason, when Keller's at a higher innings count, yeah, I could see it. And I wouldn't be all that mad about it either, in all honesty. Going back to your first question, though, which role player from the 2013 team would fit best with this team? I think you have to go look at pitching, and you have to go look. I don't know. It's kind of tough because I want to say pitching, but I also want to say Josh Harrison just because Josh Harrison is my favorite player from that time period. I mean, I still have his jersey right here. But Josh Harrison would do a lot of things for this team. He would sure up see, because you're saying role player, and that's where I'm trying to think of what you would consider a role player, Drew, because I could say Starling Marte. I don't even remember if he was on that team. So let me look up the 2013 roster before I make myself look like a fool. But there's a lot of players from that team that could really, really make an impact. I mean, you look at Russell Martin, he would be a great backup catcher to Davis. Gabby Sanchez, I think, would actually be probably the best answer from that team. I mean, you're looking at a first baseman that hit 254 with a 762 OPS, a guy that could play that position. Pedro Alvarez would be another good one. Starling Marte. There's a lot of good guys that you could bring from that group that would be very good. I mean, even Clint Barnes, if you really want to, would be a fine addition to this team. But even again, you look at Jordy Mercer as like a middle infielder. You have Marlon Byrd, which obviously not playing anymore. But if I had to pick anybody, I would narrow it down probably to Starling Marte, who would just slot into right field immediately. Neil Walker and probably Gabby Sanchez. That would be the 3 guys that I would probably nail it down to. Pitching wise, I mean, you have Jeff Locke, who is very good. You have Charlie Martin, Wandy Rodriguez, Francisco Liriano. You could have those guys too. But But I would narrow it down probably to a position player and probably one of Walker, Sanchez, or Marte. Those would probably be the guys that I would really want to see. Steel City W says maybe a question for JD Hafron. So I'll make sure to ask JD this question. But what about the Cardinals offseason? Has everyone convinced they've made the jump from a 71 win season to winning the Central estimated 88 wins? I don't think that they're going to jump that many wins, but I'm also here to tell you, Steel City, I don't think that the Cardinals are going to have as bad of a year as they had last year. But I agree with you to a degree that I don't understand where a lot of the hype is coming from, that they're all of a sudden just going to flip the switch back on and be an 88 win team. I could see them being an 84 or 85 win team. And I'm here to tell you that might win the NL Central this year. I mean, Nolan Arenado and Paul Goldschmidt are only getting older. Your pitching staff, yes, you got all those pitchers. You got Sonny Gray, great. You got to show it to me, though, if you're the Cardinals. And their fans probably think that, too. Is you're going to have to show it to me that you really went out of your way to make this pitching staff better. And if that pitching staff even has a couple of injuries, much like the Pirates, folks, that whole train could go downhill or go off the tracks very quickly. But we'll be talking about that more in our prediction show closer to opening day. And we have some more questions to answer here in the third and final segment. But before we do that, folks, we're going to talk about FanDuel. FanDuel Sportsbook, of course, is your one place to do all of your sports betting this 2024. And if you want to bet on the Pittsburgh Pirates, make sure you do it at FanDuel.com/LockedOn, because you can get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any $5 bet that wins. That's $150 if your bet wins. Bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. So just visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn and shoot your shot today, because FanDuel is an official sportsbook partner of the NBA and an official sponsor of the Locked On Podcast Network. And folks, welcome back to the third and final segment of today's episode of Locked On Pirates, this mailbag episode of Locked On Pirates. You guys have had a lot of good questions to ask me today. Hopefully you enjoy my answers. And we're going to look at Pats, Pens, Bucks. Which second baseman should we trade with all the current depth and Termar on the way eventually? Well, I was on the Jorge Polanco train for a while, but he got traded. Really, my answer to this question is very funny. Just because it would be an in-division trade and it would never happen. If Jonathan India is really as available as the Reds say he is, and the Pirates say, you know what, or the Reds and Pirates say this, let's go out and just make this trade. What do you want? Do you like Jonathan India enough to have him on this team? I do, yes. But right now, my mindset when it comes to second base, I think is just more centered on I need to see if any of these young guys before Johnson can hold the position down. That being Peguero, Gonzalez, Bay, Triolo. I need to see that first. Yes, that means that you might have to sacrifice this year and that second base might be a weakness going into the offseason, at least until Johnson gets here. But then at least you have your answer. I don't really think I want to go out and trade for a second baseman and trade all these pieces when you don't really have to. And I think that when you're looking at second base in a microcosm, it's going to probably be Peguero first. And then you're going to see sprinkles of Triolo, sprinkles of Gonzalez, maybe even sprinkles of Bay. But if Peguero figures it out, folks, that position is going to be just fine for a while. And I would say Jonathan India would be the second baseman that I would want as of right now if I had to pick anybody to trade for. But that's really about it. And Alex McConnell asks, how do you think the Grandal and Davis situation works out? Do you think Henry is the starter from day one with Grandal as the backup, or do you think they'll split time pretty evenly? I think at the beginning of the year, You'll see them split time pretty evenly because we have to remind ourselves, as I said in the Henry Davis show, that this is going to be his first campaign catching the full campaign. So I don't think they're going to want to overwhelm Henry Davis all that much. That's why they brought in a guy like Yasmani Grandal to be a steady veteran presence and also a guy that you're not asking to play 5 days a week. So I think at the beginning, you'll kind of see them split time while Henry's adjusting to the major league level as far as catching is concerned. And then as the season drags on a little bit, I think you'll see Henry Davis supplant himself as the starter, which is perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with that at all. And I do think that that's a good dynamic to have. Grandal can still hit a little bit, obviously a lot older, a lot slower than he used to be. But again, the Pirates aren't asking him to do all that much. They're just going to ask him probably to catch a maximum of 2 to 3 days a week and hit the baseball when he's there. Henry Davis, on the other hand, you want him to keep getting better. You want to see that slow rise to becoming a very good catcher in this league. And having a veteran presence like Yasmani Grandal should help that. Sal DePhillip, Rowanzi, Quinn, Luis, Burrows. Who got the highest ceiling, and who would you have as the number 5 this year? I have to get eyes on Rowanzi first to fully answer this question, because right now, the answer to that question is Luis Ortiz. He didn't have that bad of a year last year. He really only lost the velocity, and if he gets the velocity back, which he obviously can do, then I don't expect anything out of the ordinary to happen there. Quinn Priester, think it's going to take him a little bit longer to figure it out, but I do think he'll figure it out at some point. Then but again, with Mike Burrows, I got to see that too. He's coming off an injury. With Rowanzi, though, man, if Rowanzi comes into spring and looks good and does well and looks like he's regained the velocity and the command on his pitches, folks, he has the highest ceiling of that group by a mile. Luis Ortiz still has a pretty high upside too. But right now, if you had to tell me who the number 5 starter would be, probably be Luis Ortiz. That's just where I stand on that right now. But you also have to keep in mind that the rotation is currently Keller, Perez, Gonzalez, and whatever else you want to do with it. I mean, that's really all it is. And then another question from Rick Bosworth. If Rowe, O, and Q, I kind of like that, Rowe, O, and Q, were all to come back to form, yes, I'm smoking all good stuff tonight, what would the starting rotation look like? I mean, I think that's where you go back to the 6-man rotation, because you'd have a rotation if they all came back to form of Keller, Perez, Gonzalez, Rowe, Ortiz, Priester, and that would be fine. And then that would be before you even consider Jared Jones coming up or consider Paul Skeens coming up. But again, even if one of those guys figures it out in the RO and Q group, then you're just fine at that point. And I'm going to try to get these last questions in kind of rapid fire. Zach Shaponi, Zach, I'm just going to call you Zach. If Gonzalez, Bay, and Peguero don't perform well this spring, do you end up starting Triolo at second base to start the year? Triolo had a 116 OPS plus and played great defense last year. Something that's definitely possible, and it's something that I think he'll do throughout the year, is play a little bit of second base if there are struggles going on at the position, because he can play all 4 out or infield positions. I just don't want to limit him to one spot with the defensive versatility that he has. Nuggets news and updates. How many different pitchers will we see start this year? Well, you're going to start with 5. I've already mentioned Jared Jones, the potential of Paul Skeens. That doesn't include Kyle Nicholas potentially, Bailey Falter, Brett Honeywell Jr. There's a lot of different guys. It's going to be past double digits. You're going to see probably about 12 to 15 different starters this year. I really think so. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's not necessarily a good thing either. What was the rumor months ago of the interest in Adam Frazier when we have 4 legit young second basemen? I didn't get the reason. He's a utility player that could have played other places. That's really all it was. Benjamin Ramsden, what do you think will be the starting pitching rotation in April? Also, is JT Brubaker and Paul Skeens come back and up in June? Whom out of the starting April rotation is likely worked out or around? Well, you look at the idea that you have Perez and Gonzalez on 1-year deals, and that could give you some flexibility if you do want to move on from those guys, depending on how you want to attack that. The April rotation, I'll get into it a little bit more in my prediction show, but I know it's going to be Keller, Perez, and Gonzalez. I think Bailey Falter might end up being in there. And then one of that group of three between Rowanzi, Priester, and Ortiz will be there as well. Corey Quaglietta will be our final question. Do you believe there are any last-minute preparations through free agency or trade the Pirates can make to fill the remaining gaps at second base, corner outfield, and the starting rotation before they play their first spring training game versus the Twins on Saturday, February 24th? I don't think anything will happen today, but again, it's still February 23rd, and opening day is not until the 29th. So you got time. You got time to figure it out. And folks, you had so many questions for me on this mailbag show that I even had to rush at the end to answer some of them. So thank you guys for tuning into this show as you always do. Thank you for all the questions on this Mailbag Friday. I hope all of you have a wonderful weekend. Enjoy the baseball this weekend, listening on the radio or watching on Sportsnet Pittsburgh. Guys, follow on Twitter at MVP_Ethan or at Locked On Pirates. Make sure you also follow this podcast on YouTube and all of your audio podcast platforms. Check out the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming channel. Have a great rest of your Friday. Enjoy your weekend, and I will see you guys on the flip side.